Goeiedag, welcome. My name is Amber and today I will be doing a wrap-up of all the books I read in March. I will start with part 2 through 6 of the Chronicles of Narnia, and I read them in the order: The Silver Chair, The Last Battle, yes, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, The Horse and His Boy, Prince Caspian, and The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. I reread those because, specifically the final two, because I had just finished the series The Magicians by Lev Grossman, and he heavily references happenings in this book series in his books, but I had kind of forgotten what happened in The Silver Chair and The Last Battle, so I thought it would be a nice thing to reread those tiny little stories as to see what happened. And as of the final battle was, the last battle was one of my favorite installments when I first read those books, which by the way was when I was like 20 years old, so it's not, for one thing, not that long ago, but also it was when I was an adult. But one thing that I noticed now in all those books a lot more, or in almost all of those books a lot more than I did the first time I read it, is they are quite preachy on the Christian end. I of course already knew that this was Christian fiction, because that is what it is known for. C.S. Lewis wrote those to promote Christianity. He gives you the impression that women are to blame for everything evil or bad that happens in this world, which is something I don't really like. That Christianity is one of the only good things that is there, that everybody should believe in, and if you're an atheist, you're evil. That's why our Eustace in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, I think, or maybe the book before that, he enters Narnia for the first time. He enters as a whiny non-believer and goes back as a believer. Even though he is brought up to question everything that like religion says. On top of that, in the last two books we have of course a lot of Bible references that are not the kindest towards women, as well as foreigners and people that are generally not the same religion as you. And for the fantasy aspects, this is like a nice story, or a nice set of stories. But for the preachiness, it is totally not like worth it. I remember them way better than I found them to be now, and my favorites of the first read were The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe and The Last Battle. They were now a couple of my least favorite books. The first time I read it, my least favorite was The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and that's now no longer my least favorite. And that was followed by The Horse and His Boy, which is now my favorite installment in the series because it is not preachy in the slightest. It's just a funny little story. Just like we have then my number 2 now, I think, is the book I did not read, The Magician's Nephew, where they first enter the Narnia and see how it is made and such. Of course, it's a heavily Christian reference, but that is just like a fun, magical story. The other books are like this, way more preachy than I remember, and that is not something I enjoyed. Actually, it quite frustrated me upon this read, so the star rating has dropped a lot for this book series. After that, I went on with Soul Eater by Michelle Paver. This is the third installment in the Chronicles of Ancient Darkness. I went on reading middle grade because March was my month of middle grade. So much so even that I started a new release I did not even finish in March. But hey, that was fun. But this was the third book in the Chronicles of Ancient Darkness. And since this is the third book, I can only say that it was fun. Like, it has an interesting setting, it's prehistoric, and an interesting magic system that I cannot tell a lot about because that would spoil the first book. But in here we follow Torak and his partner Wolf, and also his little female friend, as they try to solve who is causing problems, which is what the entire series does. It's fun to follow. It's lighthearted. It does not have a lot of references, but it has some smart playing around with names, and just the setting and the research the author did to write those books is amazing. Plus, one more amazing thing, we have the perspective of a wolves, and in my opinion, as I also finished reading part 4 through 6, I think the middle installments are the best ones. So I will now go on with the next book I finished, which was a reread of Anatomy of a Darkened Heart by Christy Stratas, which, upon reread, was even better than the first time I read it. And yes, this psychological suspense, it hits me so much in the heart, because I could so much feel what happened to this person on a psychological level. Because even though I have not been in this situation, it was not my mom, I have had quite traumatic experiences in my youth, and I can totally see where this behavior comes from, because it was so dark, but it's also so realistic. I thought this book was done so well. I gave it 5 stars the first time I read it, because it hit me in the right place. And upon the second read, it became better because I actually know what was going on and got what was going on throughout the entire book, which did not really happen the first time I read it. So, totally recommend this. Then I went on reading Paulo Coelho's De Spion, which is the Dutch translation of the book The Spy, which is a fictionalized version of Mata Hari's story. For the people who don't know, I live in Leeuwarden, which is the place where Mata Hari grew up in. And I think this is a well-written, fun story about Mata Hari, but it's not in the slightest realistic. The culture we have here is not well reflected in this story. And I know that the 1900s, halfway through the 1900s, in the Second World War, when this takes place, it was not exactly the same as it is now. But there is nothing to see of the culture that was here back then. We have a whole entire older, neighborhood where the Jews lived. It's never mentioned, even though Mata Hari grew up in that specific neighborhood, or in close to that specific neighborhood. There is so much not mentioned in here what would have influenced how she grew up. And she comes across as some free-spirited female who completely, ignores and dumps her daughter, even though, of course, a mother would never do that. So, parts of her history and her life have been mentioned, but it feels like she is totally distanced from it, even though, I don't find it realistic at all, and it does not seem like the way a person from this area would, live. I can get some of the opinions of nothing is, you can do nothing here, I'd rather go to Amsterdam, that kind of stuff, because people still act that way. Because of course a bigger city usually is attractive to a lot more people. But there is no single thing about our culture in here that's not linked to Dutch generalized, maybe even stereotypical culture. I don't know, it just seems that the facts that were mentioned in here are not well researched at all, that there is no look at the culture and what would be realistic. It seems like it is based only upon one short letter or something, and that he wrote an extensive thing about it. I don't know. I just did not think it was a great idea. DNF'd this book, by the way. Even though it was written well, it's just a fun story. It does not feel in the slightest complete. I looked up, when I got that feeling after a while, I decided to look up reviews and information, and it turned out that no, this is not a realistic depiction of what the woman in question has been like. So, then I put it aside to read some books that I would probably enjoy more. And for that matter, went on with my month of middle grade by reading Outcast and Oathbreaker, part 4 and 5 in the Chronicles of Ancient Darkness series, which has 6 books. And because I read all those books so close together, they are kind of in the storyline mixed up in my head. It's just a fun story. Okay, I recommend it for middle grade lovers, even though the first book does take some time to get into and maybe is not the strongest book of all. It's just a fun story. I recommend it for children a lot. It was just fun. It focuses on friendship. It has some good, like, deep stuff happening in it too. I had fun with it. Then I went on to an audiobook that I listened to, which is called Originally Human, a novella in the World of the Lupi series. I forgot the author, which near the beginning, like the first 20-30%, I did not really understand what was going on, and then it was like a fun action story in which a succubus finds like a character who is totally attacked and almost dead on the beach, and she does not know what kind of a supernatural creature it is because she cannot pinpoint it, and the person himself also doesn't seem to know where he came from or what kind of a being he is, and then they go on a travel to find it out. At a certain point he knows, but he doesn't tell, and we have like a fun, it's definitely an adult story. We have sex scenes in it, and for different reasons, like the succubus obviously gets energy from it, but also because they enjoy it a lot. And then the twist at the end about what that character is was very well done. I am debating if I want to go on either listening or reading that series. Not for now, but maybe later. It was written well enough for me to enjoy it at least. And the only reason why I spontaneously decided to go and listen to that because it was like €1 or something. It was very, very cheap. After that, I read The Messenger's Legacy by Peter V. Brett, which is book 3.5 in the Demon Cycle, a short novella about Briar, who is a character who turns up in this book, The Skull Throne. But like his background story, and I feel like even though it is not necessary to actually read this novella, it made me understand Briar so much more than I did, and I also understand why there was no place for it in that other book, because that would have made the other book chaotic and 89 pages longer, which 89 pages does not seem like a lot, and it is not, but if the other book was already like 700 pages long. So what I say about this story is, we get Briar's background story. He accidentally sets his family house on fire, and because we are in the Demon Cycle world, where every night demons rise out of the ground and only houses and warded off places are safe, their house burns, which means that all their wards don't work anymore. They end up outside, and Briar's the only family member who survived. He also blames himself for the death of his family. Of course, it is his fault, but he was only 6 years old. He could not have known how all this stuff worked. Like, he accidentally put a house on fire because he did not open a latch or something that would have let the smoke and the fire out of the chimney. And he put it on because he was cold, which is a logical response. And he survives in the night because he uses like the sap and the plant of a certain plant. He uses the stuff of a certain plant, and he also fights the demons, which more and more people in this book series do. And this is another dive into a fear of humans in general and of the demons. I thought it was very, very well done. And now we're talking about the Demon Cycle. This was not the next book I read nor finished, but I did read and finish The Skull Throne by Peter V. Brett, which is book 4 in the quintet. And I was very hesitant to even start this because book 3, The Daylight War, was such a crappy letdown in the series. Because like nothing except for like cloaked romance was actually happening in there and like devious jealousy shit. But in this book we go on deeper into like the fight between the humans, because we have two very differing cultures in here, two differing religions, and then also people who actually do not believe in any of it. And they are like constantly fighting with one another. We have a character who is threatened to be killed off constantly because he has had a feud with like other human beings for a very, very long time. And we have like so much complex stuff happening in here. And the only thing, because I am planning on doing a review, the only thing I'm saying that was like actually bothering me in here is the fact that we have a nice Renna on the cover. Renna is... I'm not going to tell you in here who she is because that's a spoiler, but the person she has a relationship with and her, it went way too quickly, and I still don't get how it happened because like they are barely in this book somehow, and I get why, because it is supposed to be mysterious, and it is supposed to be more talked about in the next book, which is called The Core. They are going to the core in that book. Like it was obvious for me even before I started reading this book, or the third or the second book in the series, because I already knew the title of the final book was The Core, and I had like read part of book 1, so I already knew that would happen. But I'm now very curious how it ends, and this was actually way better than I expected it to be. I think if I had to give it a star rating, it would be 4 stars? Like, it was very good. 3.5 or 4 stars, and I think I want to read The Core in the end, like this year. Definitely soonish, because I want to actually know how the story ends. Like, at the end of the previous book, I did not care about almost any of the characters in here except for Alicia. And now I care more about what will happen in the plot, because like, this is such a deep character and plot-driven story. It actually has like a lot of action, but it's also based in fear, which is like, it is very interesting to read, so to speak. And all the political stuff that is happening it is so complex. Like, this is such a well-crafted world, which also is the case in this book, even though it is middle grade and does way less in depth. Ghost Hunter, part 6 in the Chronicles of Ancient Darkness by Michelle Paver. As I said, I finished this book series. It's a lot of fun. Basically, Soul Eater, I can tell you, like, there is a group of like evil mages in these books. We have Magecraft as one part of the magic system, and there are 6 of them. And the main character's father was the 7th, I believe, but he ran away. We discovered that pretty early on in the first book. And every book they have to take a battle against one of these mages, and they have to defeat them. And it's just very interesting to see what happens. And like, we have a sort of like also chosen one trope in this book series, which has been done in a very nice way, I have to say. Because the main character doesn't want to be, he doesn't believe it either, that he is a chosen one. And it is not literally a chosen one either, but like there has been prophesied something to do with a chosen one. I thought it was pretty cleverly put together. And it seems very realistic, happening in like a prehistoric setting, that what they do when they travel, like they actually there are a lot of survivaling things in these books too. But most of all, I like the wolf's perspective. And I say the wolf's perspective because we don't have one wolf perspective in this, but like 5? like the way how it's done. Like, it's not exactly 5, but it comes close. It happens in the book before too. I thought that was like very nicely done. And now I will go on to the final book I read, which is a manga, Platinum End Volume 5 by Tsugumi Oba, who wrote the story, and the art by Takeshi Obata, the same creators as Death Note. And this has like the same kind of dark feel to it, but more bloody and more gory. It's also a rated mature on the content, where, strangely enough, our Death Note is actually a YA story. Like, this is very much in depth. This series deals with like people who lost the will and drive to live, who were either on the verge of committing suicide or already had tried committing suicide. And in the case of one of the characters, he gave up because he has terminal cancer. And we see what happens when more of these characters start uniting in groups, fighting against one another, because the winner of the battle becomes the new god. Because the god, in the beginning of the story, God decides he doesn't want to be God anymore. So there is a new battle for like 13 or 14 contenders, and the story follows what happens. And like, it's very, very compelling. It sucks you in. And like, I need the next volume because this is the newest one that's been out so far. But this is what I read as 14 books in March. This will be it for now. Thank you for watching, and on to the case.